Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It is your host, as always, Tyler. And we are back here in Windenburg working on another Sims 4 speed build. So, hope you guys are all doing alright. I'm still chilling. Nothing's really changed. Still sort of on quarantine. First thing before I get started on the video is if you're living, well, I was going to say if you're living in the US, but also if you're living quite literally anywhere in the world, you're probably aware of what's going on in the States right now. A lot of people protesting against police brutality, Black Lives Matter movement. Hope you guys are all keeping safe, and I hope you guys are all keeping informed. One thing I want to do is in the description of this video, you will see a list of resources that you can donate to. If you have $5, you got $10, whatever money works. If you can't march, donate. If you can't donate, start reading up about, the way that race and class and power and all of these things work in your society, in your country, wherever you're watching from. Seriously, now is a really, really big moment for people to offer whatever kind of support they have, they can, and to educate themselves. So in the description of the video, you'll see a list of resources that you can donate to help support the protesters right now, bail funds, things like that. So please, take a second today, donate $5 if you can, do it for me. It would really make a huge difference to the movement and to the people who are out there right now. Really doing the work on the ground to make some change and to end police brutality in the States and, moreover in the rest of the world. So that's the pitch for today, and the moment of sincerity. Now we're gonna get back into the video. We're out here in Windenburg and we're working on a historic colonial house. This historical colonial house is for two professors. These are my Sims for the day. Two professors, Mildred and Ernest Zimmerman. Here they are, looking cute. They are a pair of retired professors of history, and they have recently moved into this house as sort of an opportunity for them in the last, in their twilight years, in the last couple of years of their life, to sort of live in and be the stewards of a historic home. So let's talk about Mildred and Ernest. Mildred and Ernest are two professors of history that worked at the same university. That's where they met. That's their meet cute. And they're retired now. They sort of, were the foremost experts in their fields. We'll get into them, individually in a second. And they're retired now. They're looking for a place to sort of settle down, and they came across an opportunity to live in a historic house in Windenburg on the island that was built sort of in the colonial era, late 1600s, early 1700s. And they jumped at it. They jumped at an opportunity to buy this house. They bought it from the previous owners, and now they are living in it, taking care of it. Sometimes maybe they offer tours of the house so you could see what a old colonial house looked like, things like that. So let's start with Mildred, right? Mildred is a former professor of American history at, what's the name of the university in Brightchester? University of, I don't know. in the Discovery University. And she has a primary focus on the American colonial period, specifically the period just before the American Revolution. So when the first sort of English settlements, much more than English, there were Swedish settlements, there were all sorts of settlements, but when the first sort of English settlements came around, especially in the area of Massachusetts, she focuses on a lot of sort of what colonial practices look like, how people lived during that time, things like that. So she's sort of feisty. She's sort of fiery and self-assured, and also a little erratic, a little wonky, super off-kilter. She was inspired by a professor that I had in college, she was professor of international relations, who was just absolutely incredible. Quite literally probably the most brilliant person I've ever encountered in my entire life. Everyone wanted her to be their advisor. I didn't, because I was too afraid to talk to her. I was very intimidated by how cool and powerful and smart she was. But she was also a little wonky. She would come in with her big shawls and her hair all tied up in this crazy messy bun, and she would sort of go off, a little bit about the paradigms that we look at at global power politics. And so that's kind of who, inspired me for Mildred. Mildred is kind of wacky, really, really brilliant. One of her traits is genius. She's an absolute genius. She is brilliant. She knows everything that there is to know about the American colonial period. And yeah, but she's really, she's self-assured and she's confident, and she's also kind of a little off. And then there is her husband, Ernest. Ernest, in a past life, and by in a past life I mean when he was younger, was a fisherman. He kind of grew up, let's say, in like a New England coastal town, or maybe in like Nova Scotia, somewhere in the northeast of North America, in sort of like a small fishing town, and started as a fisherman. And so he spent a lot of time on boats. He got really interested in the history of boating and sailing, started learning a lot about like shiprigging and, trade routes during, the sort of the first age of colonization in the, late 1600s, early 1700s. And he eventually became a professor of maritime history. So he studied boats, naval shipping routes, not so much naval like military capabilities, but more just like the history of boating and of shipping and sails and masts and stuff like that. So I like to imagine him as being sort of like this brash, like super like jovial, kind of goofy dude. He spent a lot of time, working on sailboats with like a bunch of dudes, like fishing for, I don't know, like crabs or something. Those shows like Deadliest Catch. Those shows, honestly, power to the people who do that. That's kind of amazing. It's very dangerous and very cool. But I've never watched the show, so if I'm wrong, forgive me. So that's kind of the guy he is. He's like a former boating man who now studies shipping and boating and knows everything there is to know about it. He loves to read about knots. He reads a lot about knots. And his focus is really sort of like the naval shipping routes of the first era of colonization. And so that's how they met. Mildred and Ernest, they met working at the same university. Their interests sort of aligned because they're both interested in sort of like North American history, late 17th, 18th century. And they're super cute and they love each other. And they decided, when they found out that this colonial house was for sale, that they would jump on it. So let's talk a little bit about this house. This house was inspired, so I grew up in northern New Jersey, and in North Jersey, there is a lot of like American Revolution history, and a lot of the houses like around my hometown and in towns around my hometown are really, really old. There are some houses in my hometown that predate the country by several decades. There are houses from like 1715, like down the street from where I grew up. And that's, first of all, cool as hell. But second of all, there are a lot of houses in neighboring towns that are really, really famous just for, the fact that like George Washington stayed there, during the campaigns of the American Revolutionary War. I call them the Washington slept here houses. That is why they're famous, because Washington slept there. And so that's sort of what inspired this house for me. There are a couple of houses in my hometown that look quite a bit like this. There are two houses in particular in my hometown that I drew a lot of inspiration from. And I wanted this house to be sort of modeled off of what's called the first period style. And so the first period style is a style of architecture that was sort of the one, how houses were built, especially in the late 1600s, very early 1700s, when the first couple English colonizers started coming out to North America, especially out in Massachusetts Bay Colony. A lot of houses that look like this. That's the first period style. And the first period style is sort of characterized by, and these are a couple things I tried to incorporate into the build, really steep pitched roofs. So you'll notice that on the build, the roof is steep as hell. And that was very intentional because that's what they did back then. A central chimney, a fireplace. So I put that in the build. It's sort of in a wonky area, but we'll get there. But you'll see a central fireplace. And on the inside, a lot of like exposed frames. And I put a lot of exposed frames on the outside as well. This house definitely is a lot more intricate than a first period style house would be. And I guess sort of the canon that I put behind that is that the house maybe had been renovated a couple times. That before this house was considered really like a historical relic, like an artifact of American architecture. The house was owned by a couple of different owners who maybe, I don't know, see like that building on the right-hand side that you're looking at, that maybe at one point was like a barn or a shed that was converted into a study. Maybe that sort of balcony that connects the two was built in some sort of renovation. Maybe the dormer windows were added, because generally these houses are very simple. And the one that I'm building right now is, pretty simple in its structure, but you know, a little bit more ornamented. You know, those black and white awnings, which I kind of stole that idea from a house in my neighborhood that I really, really like. But I think the awnings in that one are green. The green shutters, which I 100% stole from a house in my neighborhood. Yeah, so you'll notice that this house is definitely a little bit more intricate than, say, the houses that would be built in, you know, what would become to be Massachusetts in the 1600s. But, you know, I'd like to imagine that a couple of owners owned this house before the Zimmermans did, and they, you know, renovated the hell out of it. They added a bunch of different things. They added some ornamentation to make it look a little less simple. Oh, the inside of the house, you will see the floor plan. The house was gutted, absolutely gutted to hell. These houses generally have what's called like a hall and parlor setup, which means literally that there are two rooms, the hall and the parlor. The hall is the one that you enter in, and then there's the parlor, which has like the fireplace, and it's basically the primary living, eating area for the house. This house, actually, now that I come to think of it, sort of does have a little bit of a hall and parlor style. But the sort of the floor plan of this house is a little bit more complex. There are a lot more than two rooms, and the kitchen is like open floor plan. It's something that I don't think would happen in the colonial era, but I might be wrong. I don't know. There's an island, which I definitely don't think was a thing. But you know, we could chalk that up to you a couple decades of renovation and upgrading of the previous owners, who were not historians, who didn't really care much about the sort of historical integrity of a period house. But now we got the Zimmermans, Mildred and Ernest, who care very much about restoring and sort of stewarding this house to make sure that it sort of looks exactly like it did when it was built. So maybe they offer tours of the house, you know, they make sure that it stays in good shape. They care a lot about the restoration process, so they use only like the materials that they would use in the 1700s when they have to make any repairs on the house. Of course, there are some modern amenities. I don't think there's a TV. I didn't put a TV in this house. I didn't think of that. But there is like very advanced plumbing, obviously, because it's 2020, and we're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna use a freaking privy. These are old people. Come on. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention is that the house does have a second floor going on. In those dormer windows, in the roof, there is a room. But these are old people. I figured they really wouldn't be using. I wouldn't want them to be like going up and down all the time. So all the living spaces in the house are on the first floor, and that second floor is sort of being used right now as like an attic storage space. You won't see it in the speed build because it literally is just a bunch of boxes and crates. But if you would like to, if you want to move a larger family into this house, A, feel free, and B, you could totally just like wreck that attic space and make it into a bedroom. It's a pretty big room. Honestly, you could fit like a room for two kids in there. So I just rambled for a really long time about the history of the build and about the history of my Sims. So let me talk about what I'm doing right now. Landscaping. It's landscaping time. I went to town on the debug objects like I always do. I wanted the landscaping of this house to be, I mean, that's just sort of how I know how to build, honestly. I was going to say I wanted it to be like overgrown and lush and da-da-da-da-da, but that wasn't really even in my thought process. This is how I build. If you haven't realized it by now, I am a landscaping fiend, and the debug plant objects are quite literally my favorite objects in the entire game, consistently. So yeah, I just sort of, you know, to put a bunch of bushes and plants and those little red tree bushes that I absolutely love. Some planter boxes, some of the ivy from Get Together. Oh, important. This is Get Together only build. Like always, my builds are single pack. And this one is only Get Together. So I use a lot of the ivy that comes with Get Together. That's sort of like those tendril, like sort of like white flower ivy things that climb up the sides of the building. Ivy spiraling around the chimney that sort of sticks up from, you know, the most prominent point in the house. Yeah, I just wanted it to look cute. I wanted it to look nice and old and a little colonial. So I put a couple of little touches, you know, the corbels that I have sort of supporting the eaves on the roof. I have some of those really simple columns that just look sort of like wood, like paneling that goes in the corners of each of the rooms in the house. A little bit of, what's the word? Ornamentation, a little bit of detail by putting some shelves as like little ledges on the windows, and that's about it. I skipped through the floor plan, as I always do. You'll have noticed this by now, because it takes me quite literally an absolute eternity to work on floor plans, and let me tell you, the interior to this house was such a process. a lot of first period houses, the style that I'm sort of inspired by when I was building this house, the interior of the houses have exposed frames. So what I was using was those sort of like Tudor looking wall textures that came with Get Together, and they just did not look good. They did not work. So I eventually switched it out to what you see now, which is just a really simple, like all white wood thing. It's called Barnyard Beauty. And so what I wanted to do is go for some really sort of classic colonial color schemes, which are like lots of whites, pale furniture, and then the accents are sort of like deep blues and greens, really cool colors, but very deep, right? No, not a lot of like pale blues, pale greens. And then you'll see like a lot of florals are also part of sort of like the colonial language of interior design, but I don't put a lot of florals because honestly, and this is a gripe I have, this is a big gripe at developers, if you're watching, if you're listening, it's Tyler, hi. I want more florals, and I want nice florals. I want florals that are like big bouquets of flowers with really like classy colors, right? I want like a sort of cream background and light blue flowers, and and I want that not just on the walls, but on the furniture. I want it on the furniture. When I was building my English country house, which honestly looks a lot sort of like the interior of this house, because I mean, I guess they were both sort of derived from an English style. Something I was really looking for was just like an armchair with a lot of flowers on it, because that is like emblematic of the English country house style, and also very common in sort of like colonial builds. Oh my god, in colonial like architecture, in colonial houses in real life. You see that the Sims brain is slowly creeping into my head and swallowing all of my brain cells, and I'm starting to call actual houses builds, which is my favorite thing ever. But yeah, what I'm really looking for, what I really want, is just an armchair with big flowers on it. That's all I want. So now you see that I'm going through detailing a lot of the spaces. You know, the kitchen, the living room. Like I said, just very simple when it comes to like tones and color palettes. Lots of whites, lots of white wood, very pale furniture. I use that dark floor because I thought it added like a lot of nice contrast to the walls around it. I use that black countertop, which I thought contrasted really nicely with the white cabinets that go above it. I put an island, which is sort of uncharacteristic of a colonial style, but you know, like I said, this house has been renovated a number of times, and maybe the former owners put an island in because they wanted one. You'll also notice that the sort of central fireplace, the chimney, that is a real fixture of the first period style. The fireplace faces out into the kitchen, and I did that very intentionally, and also sort of not intentionally. The unintentional part is that if I put the fireplace in the living room would have no space. It would look super crowded just by nature of the way that I designed the rooms for this house. And I didn't want to go through and change everything. So I sort of justified putting the fireplace in the kitchen to myself by thinking like, back when, you know, in the sort of colonial period, the main form of cooking would be over fire, over an open fire, over a fireplace. So I figured that, you know, the fireplace would actually be in the sort of kitchen dining area of the house, because that's where you're cooking, and your fireplace is your colonial stove, right? There were no actual gas-powered stoves or electric stoves. Absolutely not. They'd be cooking over a fireplace. So I put the fireplace in the kitchen, unintentionally, but then I justified it to myself by saying that's what the colonials would have done. Right. Now you see I'm working on the bedroom. Bedroom is super simple. A lot of the same sort of color schemes, textures that I use in the rest of the house. Light wood, pale furniture, some blues. I put some portraits in here because sort of the last big facet of colonial architecture and colonial interior design is really heavy portraiture. So you'll see some portraits kind of all over this house. I don't know who these portraits are of. They're certainly not of Mildred and Ernest. Maybe they have collected over their years as like professors, you know, historians of the American colonial period, you know, portraits of people who were alive back then. They're probably remakes. I doubt that those are like original pieces. They'd be just like hanging up in their freaking bedroom. Those would go to museum, and I'm pretty sure any historian would agree that those would go to museum. Now we're working in the bathroom. I freaking love this bathroom. It is super simple, but lots of blues, lots of whites. I use that brick texture on the floor, and it's just like, it looks really like nice and lush and lived in and wonderful. What I'm working on right now is like a hobby room. I didn't really know what to do with this extra room. I sort of made it like a sunroom, but it was too small to put really any furniture. This is definitely like an add-on from the original sort of structure of the house. This would not have existed in a first period home. But this is like a little hobby room. I put like a net and that little, you know, life protector saver thing. I put the woodworking table because I like to think that Ernest likes to spend his time like whittling and designing models of ships. So you'll see in the study there are quite a few little models of ships, and I'd like to think that those are the ones that he made. But yeah, it's just a really simple, cute little hobby room. Maybe Mildred likes to paint, or you know, they like to grow plants and something in there. There's, you know, whatever. Here's a nice little outdoor seating area. This patio balcony type thing was porch. That's the word that I'm looking for. This porch was far too big to not put a seating area. And I just put like a ton of plants all over the place. This is what I do. That's just what's easy for me. So I put, you know, some seating, some plants, some nice little extra touches, like a welcome mat. I put, you know, lights and whatever. Now I'm jumping into the study. So the study is sort of this auxiliary building in the rest of the house, and it's really big. This is definitely the biggest room in the house, maybe, you know, besides the living room, so the kitchen dining area. And this is where I wanted Mildred and Ernest to be spending a lot of their time, because they are historians. They're gonna be doing a lot of work, like, you know, reading, you know, first of all, reading a lot of like primary and secondary documents about American colonial history, but also writing, because they've probably written a couple of books themselves. This would be the spot where they do so. So I wanted a nice big desk and a big comfy chair and a computer so they could write. I put some notes on the desk, a little plant and a light, and you know, some bookshelves that I sort of pushed up against the wall. I love those bookshelves because they're so thin. They look like they're built in. That globe, which I thought would be a cool, you know, I love looking at like old globes and maps where you see like the country of Zaire, and you know that like this globe is from like the 70s or something, or like, you know, maps that still have the USSR on them. Awesome. That stuff is so cool. So I like to think that globe that they have in the corner is sort of a map of the world circa 1715. I put some big comfy chairs so that can sit down next to each other and read their different books. You know, Ernest is sitting there reading about ship rigging, and Mildred is reading about, I don't know, the Articles of Confederation. And then up in this corner, this is where I put sort of Ernest's like collection of models. He built all of these himself. There's one of like a sort of a normal like ship, you know, your sort of standard colonial ship. One of like a ferry, maybe from like the late 1800s sort of type thing, or maybe mid 1800s Civil War type era ferry. A little canal boat, you know, maybe he like went to Amsterdam and was inspired, and that's about it for the build. So I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, like and subscribe, hit the little bell, get the notifs, comment, tell me what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to see next. Everyone stay safe and donate to the protesters. Black Lives Matter. Let's see it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.